It was a Tuesday evening when I first noticed it. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that crept in when the day had finally wound down. I had just settled on the couch with a glass of wine, absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone. It had been a long week, and I was looking forward to unwinding. The house I had moved into a few months ago was old but charming. Built in the early 1900s, it had all the quirks you'd expect: creaky floorboards, odd drafts, and a maze of hallways that didn't seem to make any logical sense. Still, I loved it. It had character, and that's what I had been drawn to when I bought it. That evening, though, something was off. It started with a faint noise, barely noticeable, like the sound of something shifting. I brushed it off at first, figuring it was just the house settling or the wind outside. But the noise didn't stop. It continued, soft but persistent, coming from the far corner of the living room. Curiosity got the better of me. I set my glass down and followed the sound. It led me to the built-in bookshelf, a massive structure that had been there since the house was first built. I had always admired it for its old-world craftsmanship. I ran my fingers along the worn wood, feeling for any sign of what might be making the noise. Then I noticed something strange. One of the shelves, about waist-high, was slightly askew. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to catch my attention now that I was up close. My heart quickened as I leaned in, my breath catching in my throat. I pushed on the shelf gently, and to my surprise, it moved. It slid back with a soft groan, revealing a narrow gap in the wall. A hidden door. My first thought was disbelief. How had I not noticed this before? The house had been thoroughly inspected when I bought it, and I had gone through every nook and cranny. Or so I thought. This door, though, it was expertly concealed, blending in perfectly with the design of the shelf. I hesitated for a moment, the logical part of my brain urging me to stop. But my curiosity was stronger. I reached out, grasping the edge of the door, and pulled. It opened with a creak, the hinges protesting as if they hadn't been moved in years. Beyond the door was a narrow staircase, leading down into darkness. A cold draft hit me, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic. I should have stopped. I should have closed the door, walked away, and pretended I had never found it. But I didn't. Instead, I grabbed my phone, switched on the flashlight, and descended the stairs. Each step creaked beneath my weight, the sound echoing in the tight space. The air grew colder the further I went, and my heart pounded in my chest. I reached the bottom, my light cutting through the thick darkness, revealing a small, stone-walled room. At first, it seemed empty. Just an old, forgotten cellar, nothing more. But then I noticed a shape in the far corner, draped in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. I moved closer, my light trembling as I held it up. The shape became clearer, and my stomach twisted with dread. It was a chair. An old, rusted metal chair, bolted to the floor. And beside it, chains. Heavy, rusted chains. That's when I saw the stains. Dark, dried stains on the floor, leading away from the chair and toward the far wall. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled back, the light shaking in my hand. I didn't know what I had found, but I knew one thing for certain. I wished I had never opened that door. Chapter 2, The Shadows of the Past. I couldn't move at first. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my flashlight still fixed on the chair and those sinister chains. A chill ran down my spine, not just from the cold of the room but from the weight of the unknown. Who had been down here? What had happened in this place? The rational part of me screamed to turn around, to go back upstairs, lock the door, and never come down again. But another part of me, the part that had led me down here in the first place, pushed me forward. I had to understand. I had to know what this room was for and why it had been hidden for so long. With my heart in my throat, I began to inspect the room more closely. The walls were old stone, damp and rough to the touch, with deep cracks running through them. The air was thick with dust and decay, making it hard to breathe. I could feel the weight of years pressing down on me, as if the room had been waiting, holding on to its secrets all this time. My eyes wandered back to the stains on the floor, those dark, ominous marks that led away from the chair. They weren't fresh, but they told a story of violence, of struggle. I followed them, my flashlight guiding the way, until I reached the far wall. That's when I saw it more markings, but these were different. Words. They were scratched into the stone, barely visible through the layers of grime and dust. I squatted down, holding the light closer, and squinted to make out the letters. Help me. The words were jagged, frantic, as if someone had carved them with whatever they could find. My throat tightened. This wasn't just an old cellar. It had been a prison. Someone had been down here, someone who had been desperate enough to leave a message for anyone who might find it. I felt the urge to run, to bolt up the stairs and leave this horror behind me. But I was frozen in place, my mind racing with questions. Who had been trapped here? And more importantly, who had put them here? Just then, I heard the faintest whisper of movement behind me. I whipped around, my heart pounding in my ears, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the darkness. There was nothing there. Just the empty room, silent and still. But I knew what I had heard. It was subtle, like the sound of something brushing against the walls. Or someone. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. My mind was probably playing tricks on me, right? It had to be. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone down here. I stepped back toward the stairs, my flashlight bouncing off the walls as I moved. The shadows seemed to grow longer, stretching toward me, like they were alive, like they knew something I didn't. Suddenly, the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. The sound reverberated through the narrow space, and I froze. My pulse quickened, panic swelling in my chest. I bolted up the stairs two at a time, my breath ragged and my legs trembling. When I reached the top, I slammed my hands against the door, but it wouldn't budge. I shoved harder, but it was like the door was locked from the other side. Hello. I called, my voice echoing down the stairs. Is someone there? Silence. I pounded on the door again, my heart racing, every fiber of my being screaming that I needed to get out. But the door wouldn't move. For a few moments, I stood there, my breath shallow, staring at the immovable door. Then I heard it again, the faint, shuffling noise, only now it was closer, coming from the bottom of the stairs. I slowly turned, my flashlight trembling in my hand as I pointed it down into the darkness. The beam of light flickered for a moment, casting jagged shadows on the stone walls, and I could feel my stomach drop. At the bottom of the stairs, just where the light barely reached, I saw a figure. Not clear, but just enough to make out the shape. Someone was down there, standing in the darkness, watching me. A scream built in my throat, but I couldn't let it out. I couldn't even move. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished into the shadows. The flashlight flickered again, and this time it went out completely, plunging me into pitch-black darkness. The door behind me still wouldn't open. The figure below was gone. But I knew, without a doubt, that something had seen me. And it wasn't going to let me leave easily. Chapter 3, Locked In. I stood frozen, my back pressed against the door, the silence crushing around me. My breath was shallow, and my heart raced with terror. My phone was dead, the flashlight function having drained the battery to nothing. I fumbled in the dark, trying to turn it back on, but it was no use. I was alone in the pitch black, with only the memory of the figure I'd seen standing at the bottom of the stairs. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, a trick of the shadows and my overactive mind. But deep down, I knew better. That figure had been real. Someone or something had been watching me. I turned and pounded on the door again, harder this time, my fists aching from the force. "Let me out. Please. Someone help me." My voice sounded small and desperate, swallowed by the thick stone walls around me. But there was no response. The house was utterly silent above me, as if it were asleep, indifferent to my cries. I stopped, leaning my forehead against the cool wood of the door. I couldn't stay here. Not in the dark, not with whatever was down there. I had to get out, but how? Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to think logically. Maybe the door wasn't locked, just jammed. Or maybe there was another way out. I turned slowly, facing the stairs again. Even in the complete darkness, I could feel the oppressive weight of the room below. The air felt colder, heavier, like the cellar itself was alive, watching and waiting for my next move. I didn't want to go back down. Every instinct in my body told me to stay far away from that room. But what choice did I have? The only way out was blocked, and I had no idea how long I'd be stuck here. I inched my way down the stairs, one trembling step at a time, using the wall to guide me. The dampness clung to my skin, and the scent of old, musty earth filled my nostrils. The creaking of the stairs beneath me was the only sound, but every step felt like I was being watched. I could feel eyes on me, even if I couldn't see them. When I reached the bottom, I hesitated. The darkness was suffocating, and without my phone's light, I was blind. I reached out, feeling along the stone wall, hoping to find anything that might help me. My fingers brushed against the cold, slick surface of the walls, moving slowly, carefully. As I moved forward, my foot knocked against something metal, sending it clattering across the floor. I jumped back, my heart racing again, but nothing moved in the darkness. It took me a moment to calm down, and I knelt, feeling around for whatever I had kicked. My fingers closed around it, a small, rusted metal object. I brought it closer, running my hands over it. A key. It was old, heavy, and covered in grime, but unmistakably a key. I felt a glimmer of hope, a lifeline in the midst of the fear. Maybe this was the key to the door. Maybe I could get out after all. I scrambled back up the stairs, clutching the key tightly, barely able to contain the urgency. My fingers fumbled as I reached the door and felt for the lock. To my surprise, the door wasn't locked. It didn't even have a keyhole. The key wasn't for the door. A wave of cold dread washed over me. If it wasn't for the door, then what was it for? And why was it here, hidden in the dark, near that terrible chair? I turned the key over in my hands, trying to shake the rising panic. I needed to think, needed to find another way out. There had to be something else in that room. A door I hadn't seen, a window, anything. With a deep breath, I descended the stairs again, my footsteps slow and deliberate. I felt around the edges of the room, running my hands along the stone walls, hoping to find some hidden mechanism, some way out. My fingertips brushed against the cracks in the stone, the jagged edges of years of decay, but nothing. Then I found it. At the far side of the room, where the light had barely reached before, there was a small indentation in the wall. My fingers traced the edges of it, a keyhole. A lock. The key in my hand suddenly felt heavy. I stared into the darkness, unable to see what this lock might open, but knowing deep down that it couldn't be anything good. Still, what choice did I have? With shaking hands, I inserted the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, almost as if it had been waiting for this moment. I hesitated for just a second before turning it. The sound echoed through the room, a loud, mechanical click, followed by the grating of stone against stone. A door slid open, revealing a hidden passageway, narrow and dark, leading further down into the earth. I stood there, staring into the void beyond, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever was down there, I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. But it seemed like the only way forward. Chapter 4, Descent. The passage yawned before me, its dark throat beckoning like an invitation I desperately wanted to decline. But the heavy silence of the room behind me, the oppressive sense of being watched, left me no choice. I couldn't stay there, trapped between the familiar danger and the unknown. I swallowed my fear and stepped forward, my foot crossing the threshold into the hidden tunnel. The air inside was even colder, stale with the scent of earth and rot. My breath came out in shaky clouds, and the darkness seemed to press against me, suffocating and thick. Each step forward was tentative, my hand brushing along the wall for guidance as I moved deeper into the unseen. I didn't know how far this tunnel went or where it led. I didn't want to imagine what I might find at the end. But every step forward felt like one more slip away from the world above, from safety, from reason. As I moved, I started to notice something strange. The tunnel, despite its rough and ancient feel, had marks along the walls. Scratches. No, not scratches, carvings. My fingers traced them as I walked, trying to decipher the shapes and symbols that adorned the cold stone. Some were crude, just chaotic lines etched in haste. Others were more deliberate, forming patterns, spirals, and figures. Figures that looked human, but distorted. Twisted. My heart sank as I realized what they reminded me of, the carvings on the wall in the cellar, the ones that had pleaded, "Help me." Suddenly, I heard it again. That faint whisper of movement. Only this time, it wasn't behind me. It was ahead, coming from somewhere deep in the tunnel. A shuffle, followed by a soft tap, like something dragging along the floor. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. My mind screamed to turn around, to run back to the cellar and try the door again, to do anything but move forward. But something kept me rooted in place, unable to move. I strained my ears, trying to hear it again, but the tunnel had fallen silent. Maybe I imagined it? Maybe the darkness and fear were playing tricks on me, making me hear things that weren't there. I took a deep breath and forced myself to keep moving, though my legs felt heavy and my throat tight with anxiety. The tunnel seemed endless, stretching on and on, the walls curving slightly as it led me deeper underground. I couldn't tell how long I had been walking. My sense of time was distorted, warped by the oppressive atmosphere and the creeping fear that I was heading into something far worse than what I had left behind. Then I saw it. A faint light, barely noticeable at first, flickering at the end of the passageway. It was weak, like the glow of a dying candle, but it was enough to give me hope. Light meant something was ahead, maybe an exit, maybe a way out. I quickened my pace, hurrying toward the light. As I drew closer, the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber, the walls smoother here, less jagged and wild. The light was coming from an old, rusted lantern hanging on a hook in the center of the room, casting weak, flickering shadows across the space. The room was small, but it wasn't empty. There was a table in the middle, old and worn, its surface cluttered with papers, books, and strange, unidentifiable objects. On the far wall, there were more carvings, larger and more intricate than the ones in the tunnel. These ones told a story, a progression of figures and shapes, a history of sorts, though I couldn't fully understand it. But what caught my attention most was the figure slumped in the corner of the room. I approached cautiously, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move, and as I got closer, the dim light revealed what it truly was: a body. It was old, skeletal, the flesh long since decayed, leaving only a brittle skeleton wrapped in tattered clothing. Whoever it was had been here for a long time. A chill ran down my spine as I crouched to inspect the body, noticing something clutched tightly in its bony hand: a notebook, worn and yellowed with age. I hesitated before taking it, my fingers trembling as I pulled the fragile book from the skeleton's grasp. The cover was blank, but when I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. The handwriting inside was frantic, hurried, as if written by someone in a state of panic. Pages were filled with words that made little sense, scrawled over and over in a shaky hand. But one thing stood out. One message that had been written repeatedly, taking up entire pages in desperate, messy ink. "Don't go further." I stared at the words, my pulse racing. My mouth went dry as I flipped through the pages, but each one held the same warning. Over and over again. "Don't go further." My hands trembled as I held the notebook, my mind whirling. Whoever had written this had been terrified, trapped here, just like I was. And now they were dead. The warning felt personal, a direct plea from the past, urging me to stop, to turn around before it was too late. I glanced toward the far end of the room, where another tunnel led deeper underground, vanishing into darkness. The air felt heavier there, colder, as if whatever was waiting at the end of that tunnel was alive. I looked back at the skeleton, at the notebook still clutched in my hands. I knew I should listen. I knew I should heed the warning. But something in that darkness, something was pulling me. Chapter 5, The Lure of Darkness. I stood at the edge of the room, my body torn between the primal urge to flee and the strange, undeniable pull toward the darkness beyond. My hands clenched the notebook so tightly that the brittle pages crinkled under my grip. The repeated warnings, the desperate handwriting "don't go further" echoed in my mind like a mantra, but it was as if the tunnel itself was calling me. The air grew colder with every passing moment, and the faint flicker of the lantern seemed weaker now, barely holding the shadows at bay. Something deeper, more ancient, seemed to lie ahead, and part of me, the rational part, knew I should leave, that there was no reason to go any further. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't find out what was down there, I would never be free of this place. I swallowed hard, my legs trembling as I took a tentative step toward the tunnel. My breath came in short gasps, and I forced myself to calm down. Whatever was at the end of that passage, I had to be prepared. I grabbed the old lantern from its hook, hoping it would at least provide a little light on my way down. With one last glance at the skeleton and its haunting notebook, I turned toward the darkness and stepped into the tunnel. The air felt thicker here, almost suffocating, and every step I took was met with a soft echo that bounced back at me from the unseen depths. The tunnel was narrower than the first, its walls smoother, as though it had been carved deliberately rather than naturally formed. There were no carvings here, no symbols etched into the stone to guide me, just a suffocating blackness that seemed to stretch on forever. The further I went, the more oppressive the air became. It was as if the weight of the earth was closing in on me, squeezing me tighter with every step. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead despite the cold. Then, the whispering started. At first, it was so faint that I thought it was just the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the narrow space. But as I moved deeper into the tunnel, the whispers grew louder. They weren't words, not at first, just soft, disembodied murmurs, like voices on the edge of hearing. I stopped, holding the lantern up and straining to listen. The whispering continued, faint and distant, like it was coming from all around me. I couldn't make out any clear words, but there was something familiar about it, something that chilled me to my core. Then I realized, it sounded like someone saying my name. I spun around, the lantern's light swinging wildly as I scanned the darkness behind me. But there was nothing. Just the black void I had come from. My heart pounded in my chest as the whispering grew louder, more insistent, echoing in the tunnel like a chorus of unseen voices. My name. They were definitely saying my name. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The whispers didn't respond, only grew more frenzied, overlapping and chaotic. I stumbled forward, desperate to get away from the sound, my footsteps echoing faster now, my heart racing. But the further I went, the louder the voices became, until they were deafening, like 100 voices all calling out at once, all saying my name, over and over again. I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped, pressing my hands to my ears, trying to block out the maddening sound. "Stop! Please, stop!" I shouted, but the whispers continued, relentless. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet shifted. There was a low rumble, and before I could react, the floor gave way. I screamed as I plunged downward, the lantern slipping from my grasp and shattering against the stone below. Darkness swallowed me whole as I tumbled, the sensation of falling endless, as if I were being pulled into the very core of the earth. With a bone-jarring thud, I hit the ground. Pain shot through my body as I lay there, gasping for breath, my vision spinning. The whispers had stopped. The only sound now was the rapid pounding of my heart and the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. I forced myself to sit up, groaning from the pain in my side. The fall hadn't been far, but it had left me disoriented. My head throbbed, and I blinked in the total darkness, trying to make sense of my surroundings. I felt around for the shattered lantern, but it was no use. Without light, I was blind, left to the mercy of whatever lurked in the shadows. The thought of crawling back up the way I'd fallen sent a shudder through me. Even if I could climb back, I wasn't sure I wanted to return to the tunnel with those whispers. But as I sat there in the cold, damp earth, I realized something else. The ground beneath me wasn't solid stone. It was soft, almost spongy. I reached down, my fingers digging into the surface. Dirt. No, not just dirt, something was buried here. I scrambled back, my heart racing again as I realized what I had been sitting on. My hand brushed against something cold and solid, a piece of metal. A handle. A door. My pulse quickened as I felt around the edges, confirming what I feared. There was a trapdoor buried in the dirt beneath me. And whatever lay behind it had been buried for a reason. With shaking hands, I dug into the earth, clearing away the dirt until the door was fully exposed. It was old, made of rusted metal, and covered in thick grime. There was no lock on it, only a handle, as though whatever was down here had been sealed away without the need for one. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was almost worse. I had a choice now. I could leave the door alone, try to find another way out, and forget I had ever found this place. Or I could open it. My fingers closed around the cold metal handle, and I pulled. Chapter 6, The Unveiling. The metal handle groaned as I pulled, its rusted joints resisting as though the door itself were fighting to stay closed. My muscles strained, and a low scraping noise filled the chamber as the trapdoor slowly lifted. The air that rushed out from beneath was thick and damp, like the breath of something ancient and long buried. The stench hit me first, a foul, earthy odor that made my stomach churn. Whatever was down there had been sealed away for a reason, and for a moment, I hesitated, wondering if I should have just left it alone. But I couldn't stop now. Something deep inside me, an irrational curiosity mingled with terror, drove me forward. The trapdoor creaked open fully, revealing a narrow hole in the ground, just large enough for a person to descend. Below, there was nothing but darkness, an abyss that seemed to go on forever. My mind raced as I stared into the void, trying to rationalize why I was still considering going down. But the pull, that strange, inexplicable lure, wouldn't let me leave. I fumbled for my phone, praying for even a flicker of light, but it was still dead. I cursed under my breath, peering into the hole. I had no idea how deep it went, or what was waiting at the bottom, but something had been trapped here, sealed away by whoever built this place. And now I had opened it. Gripping the edge of the hole, I swung my legs over and began to lower myself down. My heart pounded in my ears as my feet dangled in the darkness, searching for a foothold. The walls were slick with moisture, and every movement felt precarious, as if I could slip and fall at any moment. Finally, my feet touched something solid, not stone, but wood. I exhaled in relief, though the terror still clawed at my insides. I crouched low, feeling my way through the darkness. The ground was uneven, a mix of dirt and rotting wood, and the smell was even worse down here, overwhelming my senses. I had no way of knowing how far I had descended or how much further I'd have to go. My hands brushed against something cold and metal, sending a jolt through me. A chain. It was thick and heavy, bolted into the ground. My fingers traced along its length, finding that it wasn't just a single chain, but many all tangled together in a mass of rusted metal, as though they had been used to bind something. Or someone. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I imagined what this place had been used for. I stumbled forward, my legs trembling as I tried to orient myself in the darkness. My foot kicked against something hard, and I froze. I crouched down, feeling the object with trembling hands. It was a box. Small, wooden, and almost entirely decayed, the box felt fragile in my hands, as if it might crumble if I applied too much pressure. But it was locked. I ran my fingers over the surface, finding a latch that had long since rusted shut. For some reason, this box seemed important, like it held the key to whatever had happened here. Desperation overtook me, and I used a nearby rock to bash the latch, each hit sending an echo through the narrow space. After a few strikes, the rusted lock gave way, and the lid creaked open. Inside, nestled in the rotting remains of what looked like fabric, was an object that gleamed faintly in the darkness. A mirror. But this wasn't any ordinary mirror. It was small, almost handheld, encased in an ornate silver frame that, despite the decay around it, had somehow remained pristine. The glass itself was strange, smooth and dark, as though it absorbed the light rather than reflected it. I held it up, staring into the depths of the blackened glass, my reflection barely visible in the dim light. As I looked closer, something flickered in the reflection. A shape. A movement. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it wasn't me. Something was standing behind me. I dropped the mirror in shock, the clatter of metal against stone echoing through the chamber. My chest tightened, and I turned slowly, dread coursing through my veins. The darkness around me shifted, and for a moment, I thought I saw it, a figure, tall and shadowy, looming in the far corner of the room. My heart raced, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs refused to move. The figure stood still, just beyond the edge of my vision, a dark presence that seemed to watch me with eyes I couldn't see but could feel burning into me. Then it moved. Slowly, the figure took a step toward me, its form barely distinguishable in the darkness, but unmistakably there. My body finally snapped into action, and I scrambled backward, the chains clattering beneath me as I stumbled and fell. My hands found the mirror again, and without thinking, I held it up. The figure stopped. In the reflection, I saw it clearly, a tall, gaunt silhouette, its face hidden in shadow, but its eyes glowing faintly, two pinpricks of light in the darkness. It hovered there, frozen, as though the mirror had somehow halted its advance. I was shaking uncontrollably now, my mind racing. What was this thing? And why had it been trapped down here? The air grew colder, and I could hear the soft whispers returning, faint at first, but growing louder by the second. The figure in the mirror didn't move, but I could feel its presence growing stronger, more oppressive. I knew I couldn't stay here. Clutching the mirror tightly, I stumbled to my feet and backed away, not daring to take my eyes off the figure in the reflection. As I moved, the whispers grew louder, more frantic, like a chorus of voices trying to warn me. I reached the wall of the chamber and felt my way toward the tunnel, keeping the mirror raised as I moved. The figure remained in place, watching me through the glass, but it didn't follow. As soon as I reached the entrance to the tunnel, I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my ears, the whispers echoing all around me. The narrow passage seemed to stretch on forever, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Whatever I had found down there, whatever I had released, was not meant to be disturbed. And I had a feeling it wasn't finished with me yet. Chapter 7, The Weight of Knowledge. I sprinted through the tunnel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The darkness around me seemed to pulse with life, and the oppressive whispers continued to fill the air, swirling around me like a storm of voices. I gripped the mirror tightly in one hand, terrified to drop it again, knowing that whatever had been down there was somehow connected to this object. The moment I had crossed back into the cellar, the whispers stopped. The suffocating presence eased, and the air, though still cold, didn't cling to my skin with the same unnatural weight. For the first time since I'd opened the trapdoor, I allowed myself to breathe. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold stone wall, and stared at the mirror in my hand. The glass was still smooth and dark, but the faint reflection of my face was no longer distorted by the shadowy figure. I ran my fingers over the ornate silver frame, its design intricate and strange. There were symbols carved into the metal, the same spirals and shapes I had seen in the tunnel. I didn't know what this mirror was, or why it had been buried down there with that thing. But whatever it was, I knew it was important. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing heart. My body ached from the fall and the frantic escape, but worse than the physical pain was the growing sense of dread gnawing at the edges of my mind. I had disturbed something. I had opened a door that was meant to stay closed. And I wasn't sure if it could be undone. After a few minutes, I forced myself to stand, the mirror still clutched tightly in my hand. I had to get out of this house. I needed answers, but I couldn't find them here, not in this place that felt like a tomb. I didn't know where to begin, but I had a sinking feeling that the answers might be tied to this strange, cursed object. I made my way back through the cellar and up the stairs to the ground floor. The house was eerily silent, the faint groan of the old wooden beams the only sound as I crept toward the front door. My footsteps felt too loud, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I glanced over my shoulder more than once, half expecting to see that shadowy figure standing in the doorway, but there was nothing. Just the hollow emptiness of the house. Finally, I reached the door and grasped the cold metal handle. I twisted it, half afraid it would be locked or stuck like so many other things in this house, but to my relief, the door opened without a sound. Cool night air rushed in, and I stepped out into the moonlight, the weight of the house falling away behind me. But as I crossed the threshold, I felt it. A sudden, sharp chill ran down my spine, and for the briefest moment, I felt something brush against my arm. I froze, heart pounding, and looked around, but there was no one there. No shadowy figure lurking in the dark. No whispering voices. Just the night, quiet and still. I hurried down the front steps, not daring to look back at the house. The mirror was heavy in my hand, and as I made my way to my car, I kept glancing down at it, half expecting the reflection to shift again. But it remained dark, unassuming. I couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over, that it had followed me, even if I couldn't see it. I threw the mirror onto the passenger seat and climbed into the driver's side, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I peeled away from the house, the tires crunching over gravel as I sped down the road. The house grew smaller in my rearview mirror, disappearing into the darkness of the trees. But the further I drove, the more the sense of unease grew. The mirror sat beside me, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light of the dashboard, and every so often, I would catch a glimpse of something in the reflection. Not the shadowy figure, but something else. A flicker of movement that was too quick to make out. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, I had made a decision. I needed help. Whatever this mirror was, whatever I had awakened in that house, I couldn't face it alone. I couldn't just walk into a police station and explain that I had found a haunted object in a hidden tunnel beneath my house. No one would believe me. I barely believed it myself. but there was someone who might. I pulled over to the side of the road and dug my phone out of my pocket, my fingers still shaking. With a deep breath, I dialed the number one I hadn't used in years, but one I knew by heart. After a few rings, a voice answered, groggy and confused. "Hello. It's me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then, "It's been a long time. What's going on?" "I found something," I said, glancing at the mirror on the seat beside me. "Something bad. I don't know how to explain it, but I need you to come. Please." A long silence followed, and for a moment, I thought he was going to hang up. But then, in a quiet, serious tone, he said, "I'll be there." I hung up, my heart still racing, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a small glimmer of hope. He would know what to do. He had always been good with the strange, the unexplainable. And if anyone could help me figure out what was going on, it was him. But even as I sat there in the quiet of the car, the mirror gleaming faintly beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening, it was far from over. The trapdoor had been opened. And something had followed me out.